Women with Disabilities Victoria is an organisation run by and for women with disabilities. We would like to welcome all our members, stakeholders and guests to respect, inclusion and equality, building workforce capacity to prevent violence against women with disabilities. We're here to celebrate today both 16 Days of Activism against gender-based violence and International Day of People with Disability. Firstly, before we begin, I'd like to mention that this event will be recorded. Your video should be off by default. If you don't want to be filmed in the recording and your video happens to be turned on, you can select Stop Video. We will be putting the instructions up on screen in just a moment. And while we're waiting for those instructions to come up, I will mention that you might be hearing in the background my little son. Here we go, we've got those instructions for you now. So if you'd like to turn off your video, those are the instructions for you to do that. Just to reiterate, and as you will have already seen, we have Auslan interpreters and captioning available during this event. The invitation email has sent a link, has a link under accessibility to all of the accessible versions of the resources that we're showcasing today. So we have them available for people who might be using screen reading software or screen enlargement software. If you are on computers, please keep your Zoom on speaker view for best results. Mobile phones have limited accessibility options available. Now I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today across Victoria. In my case, this is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and young leaders emerging. And in particular, given that today is International Day of People with Disability, acknowledge that there are higher rates of disability in Aboriginal communities. It's about 1 in every 5 people in Australia generally has a disability. It's about 37% in Aboriginal communities. And some of those communities don't have words that talk about disability in the same way that we do. So there's additional complexity. And I want to acknowledge particularly the resilience and strength of our Aboriginal sisters today. There are many amazing allies who have joined us today. And when I looked through the list of attendees, if I were to name all of the important people who have come together with us to celebrate today, I would be here for a very long time. So I want to extend a warm thank you to all of the leaders from family violence and disability organisations who are here today. Acknowledge that we have some board members from WWD with us on this meeting, and welcome all of you very warmly. This event is an opportunity to bring workforces together to promote gender and disability equality and prevention of violence against women with disabilities. Today we'll be showcasing our new workforce development resources, enjoying 3 lightning presentations on respect from our workforce development team, followed by a panel discussion with women with disabilities on prevention of violence. Now I'm very excited today to be able to talk to you about our resources. WWD, and particularly our workforce development team, have prioritised preventing violence against women with disabilities. In the COVID-19 context, women with disabilities have experienced increased isolation and further challenges to their empowerment. That means that preventing violence against women with disabilities is more important than ever. We have developed a number of new and recent resources to assist disability and social services, as well as prevention and women's health services workforces to prevent violence against women with disabilities. These resources were funded by the Victorian Government, and we extend our thanks to the government for their ongoing support of WWD and of this very important work. So why focus on women with disabilities? We'll just wait for the slide to come up. There we go. As we can see on the first resource, Facts on Violence Against Women with Disabilities, women with disabilities experience high rates of violence and many barriers to seeking support. This resource is helpful in understanding why we focus on women with disabilities, and also has an accompanying resource for teams to use to explore these statistics together. This resource, along with the following resources, were released in September 2020. Other key gender and disability workforce development resources included 10 actions to be a gender and disability equitable organisation, working towards gender and disability equality workbook, prevention action planning for disability support workers, intersectionality prevention and disability resource, and 4 guides that sit alongside our prevention, early intervention and response videos. Please go and visit our website for more information about these resources. We have 3 new resources to talk to you about today. The first is a gender and disability workforce development resource focusing on challenging condoning of violence against women with disabilities. This resource breaks down what condoning of violence against women with disabilities looks like for us, for women with disabilities. This can include victim blaming, perpetrator excusing, trivialising violence, or using disability deficit language, talking about disability as though it's a weakness. The resource then breaks down the positive actions that you can take to challenge this condoning through anti-violence messaging and disability strength-based language. This is one of a series of resources that will be developed and launched over the coming months, bringing a disability lens on the drivers and essential actions to change the story prevention framework. The next resource is a Women's Health Service Capacity Building Project resource, the Disability and Prevention of Violence Against Women Auditing Toolkit. This resource was developed and piloted by Women's Health East and Women's Health Loddon Mallee in 2019-20, and we thank them very much for their partnership and support in this project. The resource assists women's health services and prevention organisations to promote gender and disability equality and prevent violence against women by self-assessing their partnerships, their knowledge, their resources, the way they operate, and the physical infrastructure that they have. The last resource, Women with Disabilities Respect is in honour of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. This resource focuses on increasing respect towards women with disabilities and aims to inspire action and to encourage members of the public to embrace the types of behaviours and actions that represent and personify respect. For each day of the social media campaign, WWD has been posting a Respect Is statement on our social media channels, each one describing what women with disabilities think respect is. This campaign was created in consultation with women with disabilities. For me personally, respect means being heard. As women, we often find it difficult to speak up, to have our voices respected, to be taken seriously when we're particularly in male-dominated environments. But as a woman with a disability, there's a particular slant on that. I need others to be able to take proactive steps to hear me. That means I need specialist technology when I go into meetings. It means I need the space and time for people to let me speak when I find it difficult to follow a conversation. Please visit our website and our social media pages for more information about these and other WDV prevention of violence against women programs and resources. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our very special guest, the Honourable Gabrielle Williams MP, Minister for the Prevention of Family Violence and Minister for Women and Minister for Aboriginal Affairs. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah, for that very warm introduction and for all the powerful work that you do and your team does each and every day. Before I begin, though, please let me acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, noting, of course, that we are meeting on many different lands in this virtual world that we've become very accustomed to this year. and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I also want to acknowledge any victim survivors of family violence that we may have present here today, and acknowledge all of those who have lost their lives as a consequence of family violence or violence against women, and those who continue to live with the trauma of that violence. I also want to give a special acknowledgement to those who use those experiences to advocate for the improvement in our systems, or to give a voice to those who may not be able to have one, or indeed may not feel ready to share their stories yet. It is such a powerful contribution to make, and it comes at great personal cost for those individuals who do such important work, whether it be advocating to the government or advocating across our community for change or for better understanding. And I do know in our list of speakers today, we have Nicole Lee, who was formerly a member of the government's Victim Survivor Advisory Council, a body that has been absolutely integral to informing government policy in this area and to making sure that our response to the Royal Commission for Family Violence keeps victim survivors at the centre. It's not easy work for members of VSAC, and Nicole included, and I'm sure she could speak to that. But it is so important. And so I do want to acknowledge both Nicole specifically, but others that I know will be on this call who have done similar work. I also want to acknowledge, of course, Leah and the team at WWD. What an incredible organisation, always ready to have the tough conversations to hold us to account in government, which is very important, and to raise awareness about a range of issues that impact women with disabilities, and to effectively work towards making our community, our society, a more inclusive and empowering one. So thank you. And of course, to an amazing list of speakers who are on the speaking list today, an incredible and powerful group of people who will be participating in today's conversation, and all of those who are joining us. It's really great to see people so engaged in these issues. Obviously, it's wonderful to be here on a really important occasion in celebrating International Day of People with a Disability, but also to be here during the 16 Days of Activism. And I know Leah talked about possibly being able to hear her young son in the background. I personally love the sound of children in the backdrop. It's one of the many things about Zoom meetings that I've really grown to adore. I apologise if you hear my dog in the background, because sometimes she decides that she wants to participate in the discussion too. So apologies in advance if that happens. But look, today really is not only a wonderful opportunity, I think, to reflect on the immense contributions of Victorian women living with a disability, but also I think a time to reflect on how we can make our communities more inclusive and more empowering for everybody. And so I really want to that end, congratulate Women with Disabilities Victoria on these fantastic new workforce development resources, which I think take us a significant step closer to achieving this goal of a more inclusive and empowering community. I also, though, want to thank you for your support of the 16 Days of Activism against gender-based violence. As we in this room, this virtual room, would know, this campaign is really important to galvanising individuals, communities, organisations, every corner of our community really, to address gender inequality that we know drives violence against women and girls. It's also about using our collective power, our voices, our influence to eradicate violence against women. And arguably, it's more important now than ever that we do everything we can to prevent violence and to better respond to it when it does happen. Devastatingly, and this is a story I think we're all becoming more accustomed to hearing, and that's a positive thing, but increasingly we're seeing the research come through about the impacts of COVID-19 and the fact that it has essentially created an international crisis for women's safety. Some of that is issues that COVID itself has created by virtue of restrictions, but some of it is really just that it is magnifying existing fault lines that exist within our communities, existing inequalities, and existing and bringing out into the open existing issues like violence against women. And we know that for some parts of our community, that's compounded. And I think Leah did well in identifying the fact that women with disabilities feel that impact more strongly than others in our community. We know during this time that 1 in 10 Australian women are reporting that they've experienced family violence during the pandemic, and 1/3 of those have experienced it for the very first time, which is obviously deeply concerning. We know that the pandemic has intensified the underlying drivers of violence against women, and there's a range of those, but including economic insecurity and access to paid work, among many other factors that we know have been aggravated during this time. But we also know that the restrictions during the pandemic and the isolation for many at home has made it more difficult to seek and access help, particularly when many of our systems are phone-based. And if you're effectively holed up with an abuser at home, that leaves very little opportunity to get the help that you need. But as horrifying as those statistics are, they really only tell part of the story. And I hope everybody in this room would be well familiar with that. For example, we know that compared to women without disabilities, women with disabilities are more likely to experience violence and for far more extended periods of time as well. And in a case where their abuser is also their carer, these women also face immense hurdles to seeking and accessing help. And we know that's been even more difficult in recent times. That's why it really is essential that our work to prevent family violence is intersectional and inclusive of all women. And we've been making a significant effort in the Victorian government to ensure that, that we're improving on that measure. And I think we've still got some way to go. But the resources created by WWD provide really important tools for those not only working in disability in identifying, preventing and responding to family violence, but also those working in prevention of violence against women to better understand the unique experiences of women with disabilities in all of their activities too. So I want to thank WWD for the vital work that you undertake also in advocating for women living with disabilities, which of course is what the 16 Days of Activism is all about. And for your commitment along with governments and many other corners of our community to creating families and workplaces and community structures that embed equality and provide equal opportunities for security and success. Of course, a part of that is using our collective power to call out harmful attitudes and behaviours that we know drive this violence, because ultimately we know that devaluing women increases the likelihood of violence against women. And you would have heard probably myself and certainly the Premier say many times that bad attitudes towards women lead to bad outcomes for women. And there is a spectrum of those bad outcomes, and violence is a part of that spectrum, sadly. And that's why also that during the 16 days, the Victorian government is again focusing on our Respect, Call It Out campaign. And we're asking people to consider what respect means, what it looks like, and how to put it into practice into their everyday lives, whether that be with family, intimate partners, or other important relationships. And it was lovely to hear Leah reflecting on what respect means for her. As individuals, as professionals, as just people in our own communities, we really must take responsibility for our own words and actions. And we really must make greater efforts, I think, to call out disrespectful behaviour when we see it, whether that's harmful words, attitudes, behaviours, or sexist or ableist jokes and language that we know often we're too quick to let pass us by. And I think that's changing, and it needs to change. So I want to thank you all for the work you do to build respect in our community, and everybody participating in today is playing a really significant role in that. I want to also thank you for the immense support that you provide to those who've been victims of family violence. And once again, thank WWD for organising this event, for the resources that have been put together. Money well spent as far as the Victorian government's concerned. And of course, for your commitment to the prevention of family violence and violence against women. It's a pleasure to be able to participate today and say a few words. And I really look forward to working with WWD and probably all of our partners here who are attending today into the future, so that we can build a community, build a Victoria free from violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Williams. We are very grateful to have your support, and know that you share our commitment to preventing violence against women with disabilities. So thank you so much for coming today and being part of our event. And we look forward to speaking to you and working with you into the future. Thank you so much. So a little bit about me. So I'm Bianca Evans. I am the Gender and Disability Workforce Development Program Manager at WWD. I have a lived experience of disability. I identify as a queer woman. I'm a victim survivor of violence, and I'm kind of a cat person. So, however, if you do hear dogs in the background, they are my partners. So I do apologise for that. Up next, we have some lightning talks from WDV staff, specifically around workforce development, preventing violence against women with disabilities. So I'm going to introduce 3 lightning talks. We have a lightning talk on respect is, language that includes and empowers. We have a lightning talk on prevention of violence against women with disabilities, organisational capacity building. And we have a lightning talk on making sexual and reproductive health more respectful for women with disabilities. So we have 6 presenters that will be co-facilitating 3 lightning talks. So the first group will be presenting on respect is, language that includes and empowers, and we have Tess Karamballis and Olivia Franklin. Tess is a social worker with a lived experience of cerebral palsy who is passionate about creating a world free from violence and discrimination for women with disabilities. She has been working in the workforce development team as a trainer and co-facilitator at WDV for 2 years and has recently completed her Cert 4 in training and assessment, which was a fantastic achievement. Olivia Franklin has a background in family violence response and international development with a focus on women's rights. She is a passionate feminist and committed to ending violence against all women. So I will get them queued up now. Excellent. All right. So my computer was just having a technical moment there. Did you hear my introduction?
Yes.
Brilliant. Fantastic. It was just like throwing a flashlight up that said, I don't know if anyone heard that. So welcome to the online event and fun troubleshooting that we all have with these wonderful things. So as I said before, welcome to Tess, who is now on screen with us, and Olivia Franklin. I will share their PowerPoints with you, and we will hopefully have everything running beautifully again. Excellent. All right, Tess and Olivia, over to you.
Thank you, Bianca, and thank you everybody who is able to be here with us today. This is a really fantastic turnout. So, respect is a world where all women with disabilities can live safe and free from violence. Primary prevention is the whole of population approach to changing the societal values, attitudes, and structures that drive violence against women. This is a process that occurs across generations and targets the strict gender norms and social constructs around which our society has been formed, those which teach us from childhood that women are worth less than men and are therefore less worthy of our respect. For us here in the WDV Gender and Disability team, this work also extends to addressing unequal and discriminatory structures that create disadvantage for people with disabilities, and when intersecting with gender inequality, drive the extremely high rates of violence against women with disabilities. Preventing violence against women with disabilities can seem like a monumental task. In our training and in our new resource on the condoning of violence against women that Bianca mentioned earlier, we discuss the many ways in which we as professionals and members of the community can put prevention into practice. This can range from large-scale organisational change to just being aware of how our everyday actions, jokes and language can condone violence against women with disabilities. Today, Tess and I are going to focus on sexist, ableist and exclusionary language and how changing our use of language can help to prevent violence before it occurs. The way we use language is highly gendered. There are many insults and slurs that are reserved specifically for women who step outside of conventional gender norms. A woman who is assertive in the workplace might be labelled bossy or nasty instead of just being called assertive or a good leader. While these words aren't gendered in nature, consider just how often they're applied to women in comparison to men. Men who step outside of masculine gender norms might be called girly or told to man up. This kind of language is damaging to both men and women, as it sends the message that being masculine is the superior way to be, and it warns anyone from stepping outside the bounds of their gender. This reinforces the idea that women are worth less than men and ultimately drives violence against women.
In the same way, language around disability reinforces the devaluation and othering of people with disabilities. Throughout our lives as disabled women, we are fed disempowering rhetoric that people with disabilities are vulnerable, a problem, and a burden to society. Disability is not a problem. In fact, it has allowed me to embrace diversity within my identity as a disabled woman in a positive way by connecting to a proud disability community. And we can reinforce the strength-based approach to disability through the use of language. Avoid deficit language when you speak about disability. People are not struck down or suffering from their disability. The disability may be a part of their lives, but it does not make them worthy of pity. People are not wheelchair bound or confined to a wheelchair. In my experience, language like this is not only offensive, but incorrect. And as far as I know, I'm not glued to my wheelchair, nor does my wheelchair or disability define me. Sometimes I'm referred to as purely a wheelchair rather than a person in a wheelchair, and rarely do I hear my name to humanise me. We know that women are often objectified and dehumanised. For example, we often hear a woman's partner referring to her as his missus instead of naming her. Women with disabilities experience this as well as the added dehumanisation based on our disabilities. This is a form of disrespect that can ultimately lead to violence, irrespective of intent. In wider society, disability-based slurs are another way in which the devaluation of people with disabilities is reinforced, ultimately contributing to violence against women with disabilities. The fact that the R word was still often used as a casual insult is a striking example of the way in which language reflects society's low regard for people with disabilities. Words like insane, moron, cripple, and lame are still used in casual conversation, legitimising ableist attitudes that privilege people without disabilities as the norm. The colloquial use of mental health terminology like OCD and bipolar trivialises these serious conditions and stigmatises those who have them. This may seem like small things, but they all contribute to a society that sees people with disabilities as less than. This is also a society where violence against women with disabilities is rife.
By considering how the language we use contributes to the devaluing of women and people with disabilities, we're able to make small changes that go a really long way in preventing violence against women with disabilities. In our workforce training, we also discuss the many other ways we can do this, both as individuals and professionals working in the disability space, the social service space, or any space where you might come into contact with women with disabilities. We all have a role to play in shaping a world where all women with disabilities are respected, empowered, and able to live free from violence. If anyone would like to find out more about our training programs, please visit the Workforce Development website and get in touch with us. But other than that, thank you so much for listening, and I'll now hand back over to Bianca.
Thank you for that. Wonderful talk. It's really important that we do look at and think about how sexist language and deficit language kind of shapes our world and keeps old traditions in place, and ways that we can use respectful language to kind of transform society and the way that we see things. So thank you very much, Tess and Olivia, for that. Wonderful talk. So up next, we have Swazik Brohan and Helen Ferris. They will be talking on, I'm just trying to queue up the slide. All right. They will be talking on so many things going on here. Preventing violence against women with disability, organisational capacity building. And let me just introduce both of them. So Swazik is part of the Gender and Disability Workforce Capacity Building. She is the Gender and Disability Workforce Capacity Building Officer with a lived experience of disability. Her pronouns are she and her. She is French by origin. Swazik has an international development and social research background. She is passionate about gender equality and disability inclusion. She volunteers for CBM Australia and the International Women's Development Agency before joining WWD in September. Now, Helen Ferris is the Health Service Manager at WWD and has a lived experience of disability as well. Her pronouns are she and her. She is cisgender, identifies as cisgender. Helen has a background in social work and community sector management, having worked in inter-country social work before joining WDV in September 2019. She is a committed advocate for disability and gender equality, and she also serves as a director on the board of Blind Citizens Australia. So thank you, Helen and Swazik, for coming in and doing, well, for coming on board to this event and doing this talk. I will pass it across to you, and I will just double check that Swazik, you can see the slide that I have up there, can't you?
Yes, I can.
Brilliant, thank you.
Well, thank you, Bianca, and thank you all for being here. It's really wonderful. So as Bianca mentioned, today we are going to talk about inclusive and respectful organization, with a focus on prevention of violence against women with disabilities, organizational capacity. Respect is possessing and developing knowledge and resources to enable people inclusive of the rights, needs, and perspectives of women with disabilities. An inclusive organization uses intersectional lenses to design, implement, and monitor people initiatives. It consults with women with disabilities and acknowledges expertise through meaningful remuneration. It also uses gender and disability indicators in project and evaluation plans. An inclusive organization develops staff knowledge of violence against women with disabilities. Staff is able to identify the indicators of violence, to respond to and refer women with disabilities who disclose their experience of violence. Finally, an inclusive organization advocates for the prevention of violence against women with disabilities. It lobbies state and federal institutions for policy and practice reforms. And it responds internally to staff, volunteers, and contractors who disclose experience of violence. And now I will hand over to Helen to talk about inclusive communications.
Thank you, Swazik, and welcome to everyone. As we know, in organisations, we communicate a lot to the people within the organisation and to those with whom we work every day. And when we communicate, we build relationships and we send very strong messages about who we are and what we believe as an organisation. So how can we demonstrate respect and inclusion in our communications with and about women with disabilities? We can begin by delivering communication via a range of accessible media. There are many to choose from. As we know, we have print media, traditional media, social media. We use electronic formats, even more so now than we ever did. And we have radio and television and other means. And we can ensure that our media complies with accessibility standards for online communication. We can remember to communicate via a range of formats to capture everyone in our communication. So offline, online, in person, verbally, using Australian Sign Language, using captioning. And we can consult with women with disabilities, most importantly, to test the communication to see whether it's accessible, whether it's working, and whether the message is reaching, and who's missing out on that message. And in speaking about women with disabilities, it's important that we depict women with disabilities through the language and imagery that we use to promote positive identities. We can demonstrate the visibility of women with disabilities. A slogan I once heard about International Day for People with Disabilities, why aren't we everywhere in all communication? We can promote the empowerment of women with disabilities through portrayal depicting diverse disabilities, independence, equal participation. So I'm going to hand back to Swazik, who's going to share a little bit more about inclusive organisations.
Thank you, Helen. So now I would like to talk about employment and leadership. Respect is acknowledging the knowledge and skills of women with disabilities and recruiting, promoting, and maintaining them as staff, volunteers, and directors. An inclusive organization recruits women with disabilities. It commits to disability inclusion and accessibility in advertisement for roles. It also prepares and promotes role descriptions in accessible formats. It acknowledges the transferable skills and life experience of women with disabilities. And it also uses affirmative action to recruit women with disabilities. An inclusive organization also offers reasonable work adjustments for women with disabilities. It can offer alternative work opportunities, such as paid work placements, internships, and volunteering. It can also commit to reasonable work adjustments, including role redesign. Finally, an inclusive organization makes career development available to women with disabilities. It commits to making training, promotion, and other career development available on an equal and transparent basis. So to conclude and to sum up, can we move? Thank you. An inclusive and respectful organization has to reflect the diversity of the population, including women with disabilities. As WWD's CEO Leah mentioned, WWD has launched the Women Health Services Disability and People Inclusion Toolkit. And today we talked about organizational capacity, communication, and employment and leadership. But we could have talked about a lot more topics because that resource has a self-contained toolkits that every organization can use. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will hand over to Bianca now.
Thanks very much, Swazik and Helen. A fantastic presentation on the Women's Health Service Capacity Building Inclusion Toolkit and a number of areas for people to have a think about that they can enhance their own organisation with. That toolkit is available on our website. And we will also be sending some links out in an email after the event to everyone that was registered, so you can know where to find all of these pieces that we've talked about today. So thank you very much for that. Next up, we have Carly Myers and Zoe Doherty. They will be talking on sexual and reproductive health and respect for women with disabilities. Carly is an expert by experience and promotion coordinator at WWD in the Gender and Disability Workforce Development Program. She has a lived experience of disability as well as chronic health issues and pain conditions. She is a fantastic member of our team and has helped very much in bringing this event together. So just to add that to her bio there. Zoe Doherty is the project officer on the Access Sexual and Reproductive Health for Women with Disabilities project. She has a degree in psychology and sexology and has previously worked in sexual health for Family Planning New South Wales and New South Wales Population Health. She has a fantastic project at the moment around sexual and reproductive health, and they're going to talk to you about respect for women and sexual and reproductive health. Zoe and Carly, I will hand it over to you.
Great, thank you, Bianca. So today we're going to be talking about making sexual and reproductive health more respectful for women with disabilities. And so you might be wondering why we're talking specifically around sexual and reproductive health. And the reason is that many women with disabilities still experience forced or coerced abortion, sterilisation, or contraception that doesn't meet their needs. They experience regular violence from medical systems through disregard for consent, and they experience discrimination in healthcare and healthcare that doesn't meet their needs. So overall, they don't have equal access to care or equal sexual and reproductive health outcomes with non-disabled women. So that's where we're coming from when we're talking about sexual and reproductive health for women with disabilities. And to frame this issue further, I have a quote here from Jackie Brown, who is a disabled activist here in Melbourne. And they say, "I think sexuality and our sexual and gendered expression as people with disabilities is the area of our biggest oppression, and yet it's not often focused on at all. I think these structural issues about making transport more accessible, making buildings more accessible, they're really, really important for changing what our world looks like for us and giving us equality. But so too are our intimate relationships. Our capacity to feel loved, connected, and proud of who we are is just as important as whether or not we can get on the local bus or the tram or have access into a building." So sexual and reproductive health has a eugenic and ableist history, and it still has a significant impact on the sexual and reproductive health care and education that women with disabilities receive. So when it comes to making places, education, and healthcare more accessible and respectful, it's important to remember that rights are respect, and that it's really important to use a rights-based approach in your work. Rights and respect are the antidote to power, control, and violence. Women with disabilities have the right to access sexual and reproductive health education and services, but are often denied because they aren't designed with the needs of disabled women in mind.
Acknowledging internalized ableism and work to dismantle those ideas within yourself and the people around you. Ableism lives within all of us. This doesn't make you a bad person.